Alverson. Ron's a South Dakota farmer. He's a founder and a board member of a local ethanol company in South Dakota. And he's a past chairman of the American Coalition for Ethanol, so a national leader in that capacity. He also, in 2018, won the Renewable Fuels Association 2018 award for national industry leadership. But for the purposes of our event and our conversation here today, Ron has a reputation in production agriculture as Mr. Carbon, all things carbon. And so he's going to talk about how the ethanol industry and agriculture can help scale up carbon capture and carbon management. Ron, welcome.
Oh, thanks so much, Brad. Gosh, I just got to think that most of you guys are wondering out there, what's this farmer guy up here talking to such a distinguished group of folks out there? And it's quite an honor, and I often wonder that myself. How did I get here? My story goes back a long ways. Back in 1971, I enrolled at SDSU, and I was in the beginning soil science class. And my old prof, he challenged all us guys. He made us learn the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and everything to do with microbiology in the soil. And we talked a lot about how did all this rich topsoil get built over the many eons in time over the Midwest, the breadbasket of the world, really. And he talked about the C4 grasses that were the prairie grasses. And those of you that know about C4 grasses, they've just got a very efficient carbon dioxide metabolism mechanism, and they're able to take a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere and sequester it, not necessarily put it in the biomass, and then eventually part of that biomass becomes soil organic matter. So over the eons of time, we built up this really nice cap of really good productive soil across the Midwest. And he said, and you guys know, agriculture's really been hard on that productive farmland. We came in here in the late 1880s in my area, plowed up all that soil, and lost a whole bunch of soil carbon. We shipped the carbon in the grain off to the cities, so the carbon balance of the system went negative. Now, more recently, lots of good science says that because crop yields have risen so dramatically, and we're doing a lot better, we're doing less tillage, things like that, we're actually starting to build soil carbon in the soil. And when I got out of college, he challenged us for any folks, any young guys, he said, if you go back to the farm, do your best to save that soil and build that soil. And I took that seriously. So in about 1980, my brother and I decided we're going to change our management. We're going to start growing corn, a C4 grass, more often, try to grow high yields, and we're going to reduce tillage dramatically. We took a whole bunch of soil tests right off the bat. We wanted to measure our progress. After 35 years, we've almost completely restored the soil carbon in our cropland to native prairie levels, about 90% of native prairie levels. So maybe my unique perspective in that has something to offer this group. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the life cycle carbon intensity modeling that's being done. Look at some of the fertilizer management that we can improve upon to reduce our greenhouse gases, and look at soil carbon, some of the crop management we can do to improve soil carbon, and talk just briefly about this opportunity for this CO2 that's fermenting off our ethanol plants to go into CCS. So anybody like Far Side cartoons? Yeah, I'm right at home. I thought this was pretty appropriate. Many of you know that really the science of life cycle modeling of greenhouse gases is pretty new science. And it takes a ton of work to get it done right. And I think, it's very true that back when RFS was enacted, it was mandatory that they do the soil carbon accounting for land use change. So a lot of that stuff was done in a hurry, and it just didn't have a lot of the good data behind it. So, and I've often wondered when I looked at this cartoon, I wonder if maybe this is why it took us so long to enact seatbelt laws in the United States. This first experience. And the EPA really hasn't updated any of the life cycle analysis since 2010 for biofuels, but the US DOE lab at Argonne, the GREET model, they do a lot of really very good work. So let's look at the historical reductions for corn ethanol in particular compared to gasoline. Actually, Argonne started accounting for the life cycle greenhouse gas analysis for corn ethanol way back in 1990. And as you can see, it was well above gasoline back then. But it's been a really steady progression. These guys update this model annually, recently. Prior to this, maybe once every 2 or 3 years, but they have reams of data that they sort through and look at. So it's looking very positive for the corn ethanol life cycle model. As you can see, the most recent one was 2017, the model, and it says it's about half, or about 55% of gasoline. And then I've got a couple forward projections on there. In the USDA ICF did a projection last year of what it might be like in 2022 looking at future technologies. And they said we'd be clear down to 23 grams per megajoule as compared to about 100 for gasoline. And then the Department of Energy is working on some stuff now, and they included in their model maybe soil carbon sequestration from corn production in that, and also the CCS capture, the CO2 from ethanol. And as you can see, negative emissions for corn ethanol. Okay, how about, let's jump into fertilizer management. What can we do there to improve that? For our management, the right time, right place, right rate, and right product. There's differences in fertilizer products. And there's another big opportunity here. Over the last maybe decade and a half, some companies have developed what they call nitrification inhibitors. These things slow the microbial activity around the nitrogen fertilizer pellet or where the nitrogen is injected. And this prevents the nitrogen from changing over to nitrate, which is a pollution hazard. This has been proven to do very well. And we've had significant improvements. And I think this next chart shows you. Since 1980, we've increased the fertilizer use efficiency during corn production about 105%. We're growing a lot more corn per bushel of fertilizer that's used on that corn now. And there's a lot of things that have attributed to that. Better management, better hybrids, lots of things, better technology. And there's, I mentioned nitrification inhibitors, potential N2O reductions. Recently, in 2016, THAPA et al. Did a meta-analysis of the effect of nitrification inhibitors on nitrous oxide emissions. And they found that the use of these nitrification inhibitors reduced nitrous oxide emissions almost about 30% on average. So what's the benefit here? It's about a 25 million ton benefit per year if every pound of fertilizer was treated with a nitrification inhibitor on corn and wheat. So big potential to do that, or to reduce nitrous oxide emissions. Okay, but there's a big biofuel life cycle analysis greenhouse gas accounting gap. And that's the soil carbon accounting. The Department of Energy has not chosen to tackle that problem. And I go back to Farside here for guidance on this thing, and maybe this is where they've been. They're still describing the dirt molecule. I think if my old soils prof heard me call soil dirt, he would probably say, "No, Ron, no." He says, "Dirt's soil out of place." So But yeah, but there's good scientific consensus that crops have a dramatic effect. The crop that you grow has a dramatic effect on soil carbon stocks. Next slide, please. In 2011, a group of soil scientists and crop scientists got together and they looked at the net greenhouse gas emissions from net carbon intensity from many crops. You can see the top one is corn, and the left side of the gap, or left side of the chart shows the sequestration, and it's shown as a negative emission, obviously. And then all the inputs, the fuel, the fertilizer, everything else, all the emissions from producing that crop is included in the category. And then there's N2O emissions. They add them all up, and you either come up with a gross number. And in corn's case, they say it's negative, because of this potential to sequester soil carbon. You can see that sorghum, and just as, and by not a coincidence, sorghum is also a C4 crop. All the rest of these crops are C3s. I guess sorghum down there, well, dryland. They have dryland sorghum and irrigated sorghum. So, but this C4 crop thing is real, and it's one of the pathways to soil carbon sequestration. Also, there's a lot of scientific literature out there. There's been really dozens and dozens and dozens of long-term studies to try to determine the effect of crops and management on soil carbon. And it can be summarized in presently, right now, the Department of Energy and Soil Science Society of America is doing a huge meta-analysis of the effect of that, because they want to try to get that into the GREAT model. And this is kind of some of the takeaways they've arrived at so far. They say it looks like C4 crops, such as corn and sorghum, can sequester about 3/4 of a ton per acre per year. C3 crops, not so good, much like the chart we've seen in the former slide. High crop yields are key, and as crop yields grow in the future, it will get better and better. Reducing tillage intensity is obviously key to it. And nitrogen fertilizer increases carbon sequestration. This is because nitrogen fertilizer keeps plants healthy, and healthy plants increase photosynthesis and increase biomass and increase carbon dioxide fixation into that biomass. And crop residues they can be, if you remove crop residues, you're going to hurt your soil carbon. One of the major modeling improvements they need to make is currently any cellulosic crop stover cellulosic ethanol. They don't account for soil carbon loss from removing the stover. So that really needs to, that's part of this project the Department of Energy and the Soil Science Society of America are doing. So hopefully they'll get that right. And in the end, I think they'll find that cellulosic ethanol from crop stover is about the same as corn grain ethanol is for carbon intensity. Okay, just going to briefly talk about fermentation CO2 sequestration. This is the ethanol plants in the United States. There's about 200 of them, and it represents about a 50 million ton per acre CCS opportunity. Now, obviously, there's a lot of logistics and a lot of investment that's going to need to be made to invest in pipelines to get that to an EROI site or a sequestration site. So something in the future. And obviously enhancing oil recovery. Here's a map that kind of shows that potential. So hook them all together. But obviously a lot of investment to get that done. So that concludes my talk, and I could just summarize by saying that the potential to reduce climate change by agriculture is significant. And it's been getting better, and we can get better yet. So thank you very much.